Hi everyone, my name is Gina Sian. I'm the Alumni Sharing Knowledge Program Director, and I'm very excited to have Ask Mentor Lynn Gibson here, who will talk to us a little bit more about preparing for interviews, job interviews, internship interviews. She's a retired marketing professional, but also has written a number of blog articles on interview preparation, and also has led us a number of workshops on how to really ace that interview. I'm very pleased to talk to Lynn today. And Lynn, your approach to practice interviewing is a little bit different from other mentors who normally do a role play, a question and answer role play. Can you share a little bit more about your strategy on how to prepare our students for interviewing and how it's different from a role play?
Sure. I think what I do is a little bit different in that I offer the students an opportunity to either do a traditional role play, depending on what their needs are, or to have a strategy session where we talk about ways to plan a strategy, for lack of a better word, for preparing for the first interview and for interviews into the future. And I think I try to present it in a way that it's a framework that they can use for the interview that they may be going on for their first internship or entry-level position. They can also use it for merit reviews, and they can continue to use it going into the future, because once you have sort of a framework, you can begin to build it out with your strengths and your skills as they continue to become enhanced. And I think most of the students prefer to do that because I don't think they really want to sit and answer the questions, to tell you the truth. So we talk about just behavioral questions, mostly because when we first talk, I clarify with them, are you interviewing for a specific job? If they are, we talk a little bit about that, and we talk a little bit about the resume. But then we talk about the behavioral questions, because those are the ones that mostly give them trouble. They can answer skill-based questions very simply, and they can be tested for those. And I focus on 5 areas. One of them is work ethic, because I think in every job interview, that hiring manager or recruiter wants to know, are you somebody that's going to go above and beyond? So we talk a little bit about that, and I ask them to think about times in the past when they've had to do that. I don't make them explain them to me right then, but I do ask them to think about times when you've gone above and beyond. We talk about business ethics or integrity and how important that is. I get a lot of students that are accounting students, and of course in that industry, business ethics or finance are critical, because the last thing they want to do is see their name on the paper and the headlines of the paper the next day that somebody's done something a little bit funny with the books. So we talk about situations in the past where you've had business ethics called into question. Did you see a coworker do something that wasn't quite right? What did you do? Has somebody asked you to do something that you didn't think was quite right? What did you do? And many times they haven't had that happen. So then we talk about, it's perfectly fine to say, I've never been in that position, but let me talk to you about my integrity. Because they really want to know, are you somebody that they can trust? We talk about stress management. And that's beyond just, the daily stress of, it's 5 o'clock and I've still got 3 more reports to do and cranking them out. But it's also prioritization. Have you the ability to manage a process in a way that you can eliminate stress? Have you ever thought about, sometimes when stressful situations come up, they could have been alleviated with clearer communications. We talk about that aspect of things, and I ask them to think about situations either on an internship, on a part-time job, in a volunteer activity, in a class project, wherever it might be, where better planning allowed them to alleviate the stress. So yeah, they can manage it when it comes up, but if you can alleviate some of it before it happens, that's probably a better plus, and it's something good to talk about on the interview. We also talk about sandbox skills. Can you play nice with other kids? How do you get along with people? The whole interpersonal skill thing. It's extremely important because nobody wants to hire the next personnel crisis. And so we talk about situations where you've had a difficult coworker, perhaps, a faculty member that you had a hard time with that eventually became probably your favorite professor, or somebody that you started out really working well with and you found out they weren't. How did you continue that relationship? How do you make things happen in a collaborative fashion with people that you don't necessarily consider your best friends? And the last one is more the catch-all. How do you think? What makes you tick? I think the thing there is, what kind of judgment do you use? Are you open to discussion? In a group situation or a team, are you the person who offers ideas but also is willing to accept others? Is it a shared credit thing? Is it a me, my idea, I have to have credit? Or are you willing to incorporate and collaborate with other people? It's kind of a how do you manage your personality, and how do you manage your interrelationships with folks? And again, it can be something that a story might be something about a volunteer. It could be about a class project. It could be a social engagement where, a sorority thing or a fraternity thing, anything like that, where you've had to deal with people who may not be exactly like you, who may not share your ideas, but you've had to get along and think through solving problems.
So these are all great.
Those 5 things.
Those are wonderful 5 areas, big categories to talk about in the situational question portion maybe of the interviewing. I know that many students are very nervous in general about different interview questions, but is there a particular question that really makes them very nervous and they don't know how to address it, and what advice do you have for them?
Oh, the one question that always comes up is, everybody hates "tell me about yourself." And if they bring it up, I say it's the absolute best question you can ever get. And if they don't bring it up, I bring it up. Because in reality, if somebody says to me, "Lynn, tell me about yourself," it gives me a chance at that point to set the agenda. For the first time in that interview, perhaps, I have the chance to tell you the 3 or 4 things about myself that I think are most impactful and will give me the best opportunity to get that job if it's something that's really good for me. And I tell them, you have to think about yourself, though, in terms of how did you get to be the person you are. When I ask you, "Tell me about yourself, Gina," I don't want you to say, "Well, I'm a junior at DePaul University, I'm majoring in economics." What I really want to know is, what makes you tick? What kind of a person are you? And how did you get to be that person? So this is where we start talking about thinking back. Where did this person, this package of talents and this wonderful ability that you have to do whatever that job might be, where did that all come from? And we start talking about my accounting students especially. Well, I've always liked numbers ever since I was a little kid. Or my marketing students will talk about, I've always had a fascination with listening to people's commercials. Or there's various and sundry things that people talk about that have excited them or interested them from when they were little. And then they start thinking about, well, yeah, then when I took classes in school, of course I took all the math classes because I liked playing with numbers, or I liked problem solving, or I really liked writing. Some of my marketing folks who do collateral love to write. They've been writing since they were young. They wrote stories when they were little. Their favorite class was English composition. If you start thinking back about yourself, it's amazing that you can figure out where this wonderful package of talents came from and why you are the way you are. But they have to get over the hurdle of "tell me about yourself," because it's unnerving.
It's a nice tip to be able to look at that question in a different lens. So instead of getting nervous, actually being excited about it and seeking it out. So that's really good advice. I know that trick questions, or sometimes what people call oddball questions, also make people nervous. Can you share a little bit more what these trick questions are and how to best address them?
Yeah, anybody who has interviewed with me knows that I hate them because I feel like they're just a really waste of time and an insult to the applicant. However, there are people who decide that this is the way they're going to go, so we have to deal with it. What I tell the students are a couple of things. One, most of the time the recruiter is using the trick question in hopes of surprising you. So if you can go into every single interview expecting that you're going to get one trick question or one oddball question, you've already diffused it to the point where now you can come up with an answer, or at least make light of the question if there is no legitimate answer to it. But you take the element of surprise out of it. And I think if students start thinking about that, it makes them more comfortable, because that's one of the things they're worried about too. What if they ask me something really off the wall and I come up with an answer and it blows me out of the interview? Well, if you can anticipate at least going in that you might get a question, there are some strategies you can use to answer them more effectively. I always tell the students to check on Glassdoor, and there's a few other websites that they tend to categorize some of the goofy questions, but Glassdoor puts out a list every year, I know, and also I think Career Realism does, and there's a few others that put out these goofy question lists. And I think if you can at least read them, you get a sense for what you might hear going into an interview. And my advice in terms of strategies of answering, if there is a legitimate answer, and I think most people have either heard about or heard the question about how many gallons of paint does it take to paint a 747. There is an answer to that question. You might not know it. However, what they're really looking for is, do you have a strategy to figure it out? I want somebody who can think. So the answer to that question in my mind would be, obviously I don't know the answer. However, if I go online, I can get the dimensions of the 747. I can figure out how many square feet 1 gallon of paint will paint, and I can get you an answer if you just let me use my smartphone for a minute. Now, on questions where there are no answers, it's a little bit trickier, like what color would you be, what animal would you be? There are answers, but there's nothing that is finite. There's not something that is mathematically determinable. Those ones you kind of got to have a little fun with. The common ones are, what animal would you be? And there's a lot of answers. You know, people normally will say, well, I'd be a dog because they're loyal and they're smart and you know, they're gentle and they're kind, and some people will be a bear because they have attributes of that, or some people will be a horse because attributes of the strength and whatever. But just have an answer that makes sense, that describes something about your character. And the other one is always the goofy ones about, if I made you the size of a pencil and put you in a blender, how would you get out? That I don't have a good answer for, but I think you have to just have a little fun with it and maybe come up with something creative. But if you can anticipate it going in, I think that diffuses some of the surprise factor.
So preparation and thinking ahead is certainly key. I know that you advise a lot. Forget, or even alumni forget all these great stories because years pass or months pass before their next interview. What advice do you have for job seekers so that they can remember these good stories as they move along?
Well, one of the things that I did in my career, not early enough, I might add, I started a little bit late, was to kind of debrief myself at the end of each week. Think back about situations that came up, and I'm not talking about the normal everyday stuff, you know, you type out a couple of forms or that, but I'm talking about situations that came up that might have been a little bit challenging, that you worked through something that might have been very upbeat and uplifting, where somebody gave you a wonderful compliment on the phone, and I started just jotting that down and putting it in a folder, because by the end of the month or the end of 6 months or the end of a year, you're going to forget those things. And I think especially for people who are in internships, it's very important to document your learning, because an internship is really about learning and of course doing work, but about learning and growing. And I think as you go through an internship, if every week you can look and say, okay, what new did I learn this week? Did I learn something about working more effectively on a team? It doesn't have to be specifically about the work. In fact, it's better if it's not. It's better if it's one of your strengths that's growing rather than a skill. But what did I have an interesting experience where I was maybe called into a meeting and got to observe the dynamics and how somebody was so collaborative and was able to be the person who brought people together? I think I can do that, because I'm going to try that at when I have my next class project and I'm on a team. You take all this new learning and you put it in a folder. Or did a supervisor pay you a nice compliment? Oftentimes they say something in passing, you're smiling and you're grateful and you say, gee, this is wonderful, and then you go on and you forget it. You need to write those things down, because then when it comes time either to do a merit review or even an exit interview after an internship, and exit interviews at internships can be very important, because that internship may lead to a job opportunity, or at least an interview with that same company going forward. So you want to use the exit interview to the maximum value. So you want to be able to talk about the things that were either compliments, accomplishments, new learning, challenges that you overcame, and things that you learned about yourself. Maybe the work ethic. I didn't realize that I had it in me to do this, but, and then you tell the little story. So my best advice is jot it down when it's fresh, because you're going to forget it. And most of us don't think about, as we go through the day, well, gee, now I'm using my judgment, or now I'm using my prioritization strength, or now I'm using my people skill. We don't think about it, we just do things. But when there is something a little bit more significant, I think it's important that you say, you know what, my coping skills really came in handy this week because of A, B, and C. And you want to make note of that, so going forward, coping skills become something that you talk about.
And can you share a little bit more about how that people's impression of you and how that contributes to your brand versus me thinking of my brand and how actually instead going for what other people think of me?
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens when other people provide input, they help to not so much define your brand, but to pinpoint their perception of your brand. And of course, perception is reality, and that's a cliche, but it's true. So if somebody says to you, gee, you were so helpful, if you keep hearing the term helpful, or I really like to talk to you because you make it easier for me, pretty soon you start thinking, well, if I had to have a tagline, what might it be? Or if I might have a mantra, what might it be? Oh, I'm helpful. You begin to have other people tell you what they perceive you are, and if you don't like some of that stuff, it gives you an opportunity to change it. But if you agree that, yeah, I really do like helping people, then you start focusing more on the attributes that allow you to do that. And I think taking it to the next step beyond that, it helps a job applicant when you start looking at, other than an internship or an entry-level position, you start thinking about your second level or third level job. I want to do more of what I like and less of what I don't like. And that refinement of the brand, or that ability to know how people perceive you and to understand what they see in you, obviously if they see that in you and you're doing it consistently, it's probably something you like. So you want to find a role that allows you to do more of that, not less, so that you continue to get that kind of good feedback.
This is all wonderful advice. It's certainly not surprising that you have students and alumni who continue to stay in touch with you even beyond their appointment with you with the interview preparation. What's your secret? So can you share a little bit more, maybe even for our mentors who's trying to build good relationships with their mentees? How is it that you're able to maintain a longer-term mentoring relationship with your mentees?
I think part of it is just the whole concept. If I looked at it from a student's perspective and I were going to set up a practice interview, if you set it up where you're just going to go in and somebody's going to role play the hiring manager, you kind of think about it as its self-contained little entity or this little activity. It's got a time frame. When it's over, it's over. When you start talking about strategies and talking about the students, where did these wonderful talents that you have come from? You start hearing their stories. They talk about their parents. They talk about their grandparents. They talk about a coach or a teacher or a clergy person. I mean, it's just amazing how it becomes more of a conversation. And I think when you hang up the phone, it's not like there's something finite and now it's over. I always try to ask them to send me a copy of their resume that they refine, because normally we'll talk about aspects of their resume. Again, once I get to know them and once I hear some of these stories, I can make suggestions on their resume. Well, you might really want to highlight this because I think you can better capitalize on it and you can present yourself more effectively. But send me the resume once you get it refined, and then we'll talk about it again. I always leave the door open, and I like to do that because I'm a marketing salesperson. Most of us like to build relationships. It's kind of what my strength is. So I think doing the whole strategy thing allows me to play to my strengths, and I'm hoping that in so doing, I can share some of what I've learned over way too many years in the business with some of the students who are looking to find ways to effectively present their wonderful talents. And I think, too, encouraging them via emails, sending them a little note. I've got a lot of times I do accounting students, which is not in any way, shape, or form my specialty. But if I see something that somebody at Deloitte puts out, and it's in one of my daily newsletters that I get, I'll just shoot it out to a couple of them and say, I know you're applying at Deloitte, you might want to just read this article. Or if I know somebody who is in marketing and I see something really clever, I'll send it to them because I get some marketing information on a daily basis from newsletters as well. I do make recommendations to them on newsletters that they should sign up for. And I always tell them, it would really be a pleasure to hear from you whenever you might have a question. Please feel free to call me. And I'm kind of a cheerleader. I mean, that's my personality. So I think that kind of helps. And I'm sort of a mothering type. And so I sort of adopt some of them too. But it is very, very rewarding when they take you up on it. And, not all of them do, and not all of them have the need to. But I think the strategy thing lends itself a little better to building a relationship than doing, the role play. And I'm not very good at doing role play, so I'm happy to be able to do the strategies.
Well, this is wonderful advice. We thank you again, Lynn, for sharing these tips. For our mentors who are watching, I think Lynn is a great role model to even look into in terms of different strategies of building this relationships with your mentees, going beyond just the transactional type of doing a practice, but also, as she had mentioned, keeping the door open and being proactive and communicating with your mentees. And for the mentees here, we encourage you to do both, to do a strategy type of conversation with a mentor like Lynn, as well as doing a role play. And certainly you can do more than one. We encourage you to do more than one role play practice because every person has their own ideas and objectives as to what makes a good interview. So we encourage you to do more than one practice. Our website is ask.depal.edu. There's a lot of information on preparing for interviews. It also has a link to Lynn's wonderful blog posts. She posts a lot about interview preparation as well as strengthening your resume, and I encourage you to also read her articles. Thank you again, Lynn. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Gina.
Take care, and for you, if you have any questions or follow-up questions for Lynn, you're welcome to connect with her on the Ask directory. Otherwise, feel free to email us at ask@depal.edu or call us at 312-362-8281, and we're happy to answer your questions. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Lynn.
Bye-bye.